When waitress Lena returns a billionaire's lost suitcase of cash, she expects gratitude, not dinner. But as their worlds collide, old secrets surface, her parents' death tied to his family's past. Can love heal the wounds money created, or will the truth tear them apart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Victor Langston stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking down at the city below. At 38 years old, he owned half the buildings he could see. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his custom suit cost more than what most people made in a month. He had everything money could buy, but something was missing. "Mr. Langston, your flight is scheduled for 7 tonight, his assistant Janet reminded him as she entered with a stack of papers. "And don't forget the suitcase." With the cash for the Houston deal, Victor nodded without turning around. The $100,000 in cash sitting in his office safe was for a special investment meeting. Some deals still required old-fashioned methods, especially when discretion was important. "Also, your mother called again about the charity gala next week," Janet continued. "She wants to know if you'll be bringing anyone." "Tell her what I always tell her," Victor said, finally turning around. "I'm too busy for dating." The truth was, Victor had given up on finding someone real in his world. Every woman he met either wanted his money or was just as cold and calculating as he was. That's how things worked in high society. Everything was a transaction. Later, that evening, Victor rushed through Grand Central Station, pulling his expensive leather suitcase. He was running late for his private flight, and his mind was on the Houston deal. He didn't notice when he set the suitcase down to answer an urgent phone call. When he reached for it again, his hand grabbed empty air. The suitcase was gone. Victor's face turned red with anger. He called security, threatened lawsuits, and had his assistant contact every lost and found in the city. But deep down, he knew the truth. Whoever found that suitcase wouldn't be returning it. $100,000 in cash was too tempting for anyone to resist. He cancelled his flight and went home to his empty penthouse, pouring himself a drink. This mistake would cost him more than just money. In his world, showing weakness could destroy everything he'd built. The next morning, Victor sat at his dining room table, looking through security footage from the station on his laptop. His breakfast sat untouched beside him. That's when his doorman called up. "Mr. Langston, there's a woman here to see you. Says her name is Lena Taylor. She has a suitcase that might be yours." Victor nearly dropped his coffee cup. "Send her up," he said, his mind racing. This had to be a scam. Nobody returns a suitcase full of cash without wanting something in return. When the elevator doors opened, Victor saw a woman in her early 30s wearing simple jeans and a sweater. Her dark hair fell in natural waves around her shoulders, and she wore no makeup. She wasn't dressed like someone who'd just found a fortune. "Mr. Langston?" she said, wheeling the familiar suitcase forward. "I found this at the train station yesterday. Your business card was inside the name tag." Victor stared at her, then at the suitcase. "Did you open it?" "Yes," Lena admitted honestly. "I had to figure out who it belonged to. When I saw what was inside, I knew I had to return it right away." Victor's eyes narrowed. "How much do you want?" "Excuse me?" "For returning it. Name your price." Lena's warm brown eyes turned cold. "I didn't return it for a reward, Mr. Langston. I returned it because it wasn't mine." Her words hit Victor like a slap. In his world, everything and everyone had a price. But this woman, this stranger, was refusing money she could have easily kept. "At least let me buy you a coffee," he found himself saying, "to thank you properly." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "One coffee, but I have to get to work by noon." As Victor's housekeeper brought them coffee, he studied Lena more carefully. She sat comfortably but not entirely at ease, like someone who wasn't used to such luxury. There was something different about her, something real. "So, Ms. Taylor, what do you do?" "I work 3 jobs, actually," she said, sipping her coffee. "I'm a waitress in the mornings, I teach piano, lessons in the afternoons, and I do bookkeeping for a small business on weekends." "3 jobs, why?" "My sister Jenny is in nursing school. Our parents died when she was young, so I've been helping her through college. She graduates next year." Victor felt something stir inside him. Respect, maybe even admiration. This woman worked harder than anyone in his social circle, and she just turned down easy money to do the right thing. "Would you have dinner with me tonight?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself. Lena set down her coffee cup. "Mr. Langston, Victor, please." "Victor," she said carefully, "I'm not looking for a rich boyfriend. I have enough on my plate already. Just dinner," he insisted, "to thank you properly. No strings attached." Lena looked at him for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "One dinner, but somewhere normal, okay? No fancy restaurants where I'll need to Google what the menu means." Victor found himself smiling back. A real smile, not the fake one he used for business deals. Deal. As he watched Lena leave for work, Victor realized something had changed. For the first time in years, he was actually looking forward to dinner with someone. He just didn't know that this simple act of honesty was about to turn his carefully controlled world upside down. Victor spent more time getting ready for dinner than he had for his last 3 business meetings combined. He kept changing his tie, trying to find one that didn't scream billionaire. Finally, he settled on a simple blue one and left his usual gold watch behind. The restaurant Lena had suggested was nothing like the places Victor usually ate. Mario's Italian restaurant was a family-owned place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. The smell of garlic bread filled the air, and children's laughter came from nearby tables. Lena was already there when he arrived, still wearing her work clothes from her waitressing job. She looked tired but happy. "I hope you don't mind," she said as he sat down. "I've been coming here since I was a kid. Mario's daughter and I went to high school together." Before Victor could answer, an elderly man with a thick Italian accent came to their table. "Lena, my favorite customer." He turned to Victor with a suspicious look. "And who is this fancy man?" "This is Victor, Mario. He's a friend." Mario squinted at Victor. "You treat our Lena right, fancy man. She's like family here." After Mario left, Victor smiled. "I think I just got warned by your Italian godfather." Lena laughed, and the sound made something warm stir in Victor's chest. "Mario's harmless. He's just protective. When my parents died, his family helped us a lot. They gave me my first job as a waitress here." "Tell me about your sister," Victor said, genuinely interested. He'd never met anyone who worked so hard for someone else. Lena's face lit up. "Jenny's amazing. She's studying so hard at nursing school. She wants to work in pediatrics, helping kids. I keep telling her not to worry about money, but she's picked up a part-time job anyway. That's just who she is." "And who are you, Lena Taylor?" Victor asked softly. Lena's smile faded slightly. "I'm nobody special, just trying to do the right thing and take care of the people I love." "I think you're selling yourself short," Victor said. "Not many people would return a suitcase full of cash." "Can I ask you something?" Lena leaned forward. "Why did you have so much cash in the first place?" Victor hesitated. He wasn't used to being questioned about his business dealings. Sometimes in real estate, cash deals are faster. "Is it legal?" "Yes," Victor said quickly, maybe too quickly. "Just complicated." Lena nodded slowly. "Life's complicated enough without making it more so, don't you think?" Before Victor could answer, Mario returned with 2 huge plates of spaghetti and meatballs. "On the house," he announced, "for Lena and her fancy man." The food was better than any fancy Italian restaurant Victor had been to. As they ate, Lena told him stories about growing up in the city, about her sister's dreams of being a nurse, and about the piano students she taught. Victor found himself laughing more than he had in years. "Your turn," Lena said as they shared a tiramisu. "Tell me about your family." Victor's smile faded. "Not much to tell. My father built the real estate company, taught me that business comes first. Always. My mother's main concern is appearances and social status. They're not exactly warm people." "That sounds lonely," Lena said softly. "I suppose it was. Still is." Victor surprised himself with his honesty. "That's why I threw myself into work. At least success is something I can control. But are you happy?" The question caught Victor off guard. Nobody had asked him that in years. Before he could answer, Lena's phone buzzed. "Oh no," she said, checking the message. "Jenny's not feeling..." Well, I should go check on her. Let me drive you, Victor offered. That's sweet, but your fancy car would cause too much gossip in my neighborhood. I'll take the subway. At least let me call you a car service. Lena stood up, smiling. I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Victor, but thank you for dinner. It was nice. As she turned to leave, Victor called after her. Can I see you again? Lena paused. I don't think that's a good idea. We're from different worlds, Victor. You make business deals with suitcases full of cash, and I teach kids how to play chopsticks on the piano. It would never work. Let me prove you wrong, Victor said, standing up. Give me a chance. Why? What could you possibly see in someone like me? Honesty, Victor said without hesitation. Kindness, things that are rare in my world. Please, just one more date. Lena bit her lip, thinking, I have to teach piano lessons all day tomorrow, but I'm free Saturday afternoon. I'll plan something special, Victor promised. Nothing fancy, Lena warned. No expensive restaurants or fancy shows. Trust me, Victor said, even though he knew trust was something he'd have to earn. After Lena left, Victor sat back down, lost in thought. Mario came over with a knowing smile. That one's special, the old man said. But be careful, fancy man. Lena's heart is pure gold. You break it, you answer to me. Victor nodded, understanding for the first time that all his money and power meant nothing when it came to winning someone's heart, especially someone like Lena, who valued honesty above everything else. Back in his penthouse that night, Victor couldn't stop thinking about her question. Are you happy? The truth was, he hadn't been truly happy in years. But tonight, sharing a simple meal and honest conversation, he'd felt something he thought he'd lost. Hope. His phone buzzed with a message from his brother, James. Where were you? Missed the board meeting. Victor realized he'd completely forgotten about it. For the first time in his career, business hadn't been his first priority. And surprisingly, he didn't regret it at all. He walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Lena was probably taking care of her sister, living her simple but meaningful life. Could someone like him ever fit into that world? Or would his presence only complicate her life? One thing was certain, he wanted to find out, even if it meant changing everything he thought he knew about success and happiness. Saturday morning, Victor's mother showed up unannounced. At his penthouse, Elizabeth Langston was a tall, elegant woman who believed appearance was everything. She walked in like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. Victor, darling, why aren't you returning my calls? She air-kissed, his cheek leaving a perfect lipstick mark. The charity gala is next week and everyone's asking who you're bringing. I've been busy, Mother, Victor said, checking his watch. He was supposed to meet Lena in 2 hours. Too busy for your own mother? Elizabeth settled onto his white leather couch. I ran into Miranda Peterson at the club yesterday. She's divorced now, you know. Still gorgeous, and her family owns half. Curve, Florida. I'm not interested in Miranda. Elizabeth's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Don't tell me you're still seeing that woman, the one who found your suitcase? Victor's jaw tightened. Her name is Lena. Oh, darling, Elizabeth sighed dramatically. I know you're grateful she returned your money. But really? She works as a waitress. What could you possibly have in common? More than you'd think. Victor, his mother's voice turned serious. You have a reputation to maintain. The Langston name means something in this city. You can't be seen dating someone so common. Before Victor could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Lena. Looking forward to our date. Remember, you promised nothing fancy. Elizabeth noticed his smile. I've never seen you look at your phone that way before. Please tell me it's not her. I have to go, Mother. Victor stood up. I have plans. Cancel them. The Hendersons are having a lunch party on their yacht. Miranda will be there. No, Elizabeth stood up, her face hardening. You're being foolish, Victor. This girl probably has a plan. Women like that always do. She's probably after your money. Victor laughed bitterly. That's what's funny, Mother. She's the only woman I've met who doesn't want my money. She won't even let me buy her expensive gifts. Then she's playing a very clever game. Elizabeth picked up her designer purse. Don't come crying to me when she breaks your heart. Or, worse, tries to take half of everything you own. After his mother left, Victor stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. For the first time, he saw what Lena probably saw, a man trapped in a world of wealth and superficial relationships. He changed into jeans and a simple sweater, something he hadn't worn in years. He met Lena at Central Park. She was wearing a pretty sundress and looked more beautiful than any society woman he'd ever dated. No suit today, she teased. I thought, I'd try something different. He held up a picnic basket. I made lunch. Lena's eyes widened. You cook? Well, I tried. The housekeeper helped a little. Actually, Maria had done most of the work, but she'd let him make the sandwiches at least. They found a quiet spot under a tree. As Victor spread out the blanket, he noticed people staring. Some probably recognized him. His face often appeared in business magazines. Tell me about your week, he said, trying to ignore the whispers and pointing. Lena talked about her piano students, including a young boy who finally mastered Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star after weeks of practice. Her face lit up when she described his proud smile. Suddenly a voice interrupted them. Victor Langston, is that you? Miranda Peterson stood there in an expensive tennis outfit, looking perfectly shocked to see him. Victor knew his mother had arranged this accidental meeting. I hardly recognized you in those clothes, Miranda said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She turned to Lena. And who's your friend? This is Lena Taylor, Victor said firmly. Lena, this is Miranda Peterson, an old acquaintance. Miranda's eyes swept over Lena's simple dress. How nice. Victor, darling, will you be at the charity gala next week? Daddy's table has an extra seat. I already have a date, Victor said, reaching for Lena's hand. If she'll agree to come with me. Lena tensed beside him. Miranda's perfect smile faltered for a moment. How sweet. Well, I'll let you get back to your picnic. She walked away, already pulling out her phone. By tomorrow, everyone in my mother's social circle will know about this, Victor said. Does that bother you? Lena asked quietly. No, Victor realized he meant it. But I'm worried it might bother you. The charity gala, there will be more people like Miranda there. They can be cruel. Victor, Lena pulled her hand away. I don't belong in that world. I don't want to belong there. But you belong with me, he said softly. I don't care what they think. Maybe you should. Lena started packing up the picnic. Your mother came to see me yesterday at the diner. Victor felt his blood run cold. What? She offered me money to stop seeing you. Lena's voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. She said, I was going to ruin your reputation and destroy everything you've worked for. I'll talk to her. No, Lena stood up. She's right about one thing. I don't fit into your world, Victor, and I don't want to try. Lena, wait. I need some time to think. She picked up her purse. Please don't follow me. Victor watched her walk away, feeling helpless. For the first time in his life, all his money and power meant nothing. He couldn't buy what he really wanted, Lena's trust and love. His phone buzzed again. It was his mother. Miranda said she saw you in the park. Come to your senses yet? Victor turned off his phone and sat there until sunset, thinking about Lena's words. She was right. Their worlds were completely different. But for the first time in his life, he was willing to change his world to fit someone else's. He just had to figure out how to prove it to her. 3 days passed, and Victor hadn't heard from Lena. He drove by Mario's restaurant twice but didn't go in. He wanted to respect her wish for space, even though it was driving him crazy. At work, he couldn't focus. His assistant, Janet, noticed him staring at his phone during meetings, something he'd never done before. Mr. Langston, Janet said, entering his office late one afternoon. Your brother James is here to see you. James Langston walked in wearing an expensive suit that matched his cold smile. Little brother, we need to talk. I'm busy, Victor said, not looking up from his computer. Too busy to notice that our stock dropped 10 points this week. James sat down uninvited. The board is worried. You've been distracted. The market is down everywhere. Mother told me about your little romance with the waitress. James's voice dripped with contempt. Is she worth risking everything we've built? Victor finally looked up. Don't talk about her like that. Wake up, Victor. James slammed his hand on the desk. This girl is making you weak. The Victor I know would never miss board meetings for picnics in the park. Maybe that Victor needed to change. James laughed without humor. Change? Into what? A regular guy who dates waitresses and brings bag lunches to work? That's not who we are. Who we are? Victor stood up. You mean who Father turned us into? Cold, suspicious, unable to trust anyone. Trust? James snorted. Trust is for poor people, Victor. We're Langstons. We don't need trust. We need power. Before Victor could respond, Janet rushed in. Mr. Langston, there's an emergency call from St. Mary's Hospital. It's about Lena's sister. Victor's heart stopped. What happened? They wouldn't say. But Lena listed you as an emergency contact. James watched Victor grab his coat. You're really going to leave in the middle of a workday for this girl? Watch. Me, Victor said, already heading for the door. At St. Mary's Hospital, Victor found Lena in the emergency waiting room. She looked small and scared in the plastic chair. Lena, he rushed to her. What happened? Jenny collapsed at school. Lena's voice shook. They think it might be her heart. She needs tests, maybe surgery, but our insurance, it won't cover everything. Victor sat beside her, taking her hand. Let me help. No. Lena pulled away. I didn't ask them to call you. I put you as an emergency contact weeks ago when we were... I'll figure something out. Lena, please. Jenny needs help now. I can't take your money, Victor. Your mother was... Right, people would think... I don't care what people think. Several heads turned at his outburst. He lowered his voice. This isn't about us. It's about Jenny. A doctor approached them. Ms. Taylor, your sister needs immediate surgery. The procedure costs... I'll pay for everything, Victor interrupted. Mr. Langston, the doctor recognized him. We'll need a payment guarantee. Call my office. They'll handle everything. He turned to Lena. Please, let me do this one thing. Lena's eyes filled with tears. It's not a small amount, Victor. Money means nothing if I can't use it to help people He paused. People I care about. Lena studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The doctor hurried off to make arrangements. They sat in silence for a while, watching nurses rush past. Finally, Lena spoke. I've been unfair to you. What do you mean? I judged you for being rich, just like your mother judged me for being poor. She wiped her eyes. I was so wrapped up in proving I didn't want your money that I couldn't see. You were just trying to help. I haven't made it easy, Victor admitted. I'm not good at feelings. In my world, everything's a transaction. But you make me want to be different. A nurse came to tell them Jenny was being prepped for surgery. Lena stood up, shaking. Will you stay with me? She asked softly. While we wait? Victor took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. I'm not going anywhere. Hours passed in the waiting room. Victor cancelled all his meetings without a second thought. He sent out for coffee and sandwiches, making sure Lena ate something. Around midnight, the doctor returned with good news. The surgery was successful. Jenny would need time to recover, but she would be fine. When they finally saw Jenny in recovery, she was pale, but smiling. Did you two make up? She asked weakly. Lena looked at Victor, who hadn't left her side for 12 hours. We're working on it. After Jenny fell asleep, they walked to the hospital parking lot. The night was cool, and Victor put his jacket around Lena's shoulders. About the money, she started. It's a loan, Victor said quickly. If that makes you feel better, you can pay it back whenever you want. Lena smiled slightly. A loan with no interest? Well, maybe one condition. Victor took her hand. Have dinner with me tomorrow, at Mario's. Victor Langston, wanting to eat. At a family restaurant again. What can I say? The food's better than any five-star place I've been to. He paused. And the company's better too. Lena squeezed his hand. Thank you, not just for Jenny, but for staying, for understanding why. I needed time. I'd wait forever if I had to, Victor said, surprising himself with his honesty. As they stood there in the hospital parking lot, Victor realized something had shifted. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about his family's expectations or society's rules. He only cared about the woman standing in front of him, wearing his jacket and finally beginning to trust him. What he didn't know was that back at his office, his brother James was setting in motion a plan that would test that trust in ways neither of them could imagine. James Langston sat in his corner office late at night, looking through his brother's private files. He'd finally convinced Janet, Victor's assistant, to give him access. It hadn't been cheap, but money could buy almost anything, or anyone. "Look at this," James said to Miranda Peterson, who sat across from his desk. "Victor's been transferring money to St. Mary's Hospital. A lot of money." Miranda sipped her champagne. "For the waitress's sister, no doubt. How pathetic." "No, it's perfect." James smiled coldly. "We can use this. The board already thinks Victor's losing his grip. Wait until they hear he's emptying company accounts for his girlfriend's family." "But isn't it his personal money?" "Details don't matter. What matters is the story we tell." James picked up his phone. "Call Richard at the Daily Business News. Tell him we have a tip about Victor Langston possibly misusing company funds." Meanwhile, across town, Victor and Lena were having dinner at her small apartment. He'd been spending more time there lately, preferring its warmth to his empty penthouse. Jenny was recovering on the couch, watching them with a knowing smile. "You two are cute," Jenny said. "Even if Victor can't figure out how to use our normal coffee maker." "Hey, I'm learning," Victor protested. He'd never made his own coffee before meeting Lena. Now he was trying to learn all sorts of regular things. Lena's phone buzzed. "Mario needs me to cover an extra shift tomorrow. One of the waitresses is sick." "But tomorrow's the charity gala," Victor said. "You promised you'd come." Lena bit her lip. "I know, but Mario's been so understanding about me taking time off for..." "Jenny, I can't let him down." "I'll cover her shift," Jenny offered. "I'm well enough now." "Absolutely not," both Victor and Lena said at once. "You're still recovering," Lena added. "Then I'll talk to Mario," Victor said. "I'll pay for a replacement server." "No," Lena's voice was firm. "Victor, you can't just throw money at every problem. These are real people, not business deals." Victor ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "I'm trying to help." "I know." Lena touched his arm. "But I need to handle this my way. Go to the gala without me. Your mother will be happy at least." "I don't care about making my mother happy." "I care about you." Jenny made gagging noises from the couch. "You guys are worse than a soap opera." Before anyone could respond, Victor's phone rang. It was Janet. "Mr. Langston, you need to see tomorrow's Daily Business News website. Now." Victor pulled out his tablet and felt his blood run cold. The headline read, "Langston heir accused of financial misconduct. Sources say Victor Langston using company funds for personal relationships." "That's impossible," Victor said. "I used my own money for Jenny's surgery." "The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning," Janet said. "Your brother James is leading it." Lena read the article over Victor's shoulder. "Victor, this is all because of me." "No, it's because of my brother. He's trying to push me out." Victor stood up, pacing. "He's always been jealous that father left me in charge. What are you going to do? Fight back? I've dealt with worse." But the next morning, things got even worse. As Victor walked into the office, every eye was on him. People whispered behind their hands. On every desk, the Daily Business News was open to another article. Langston romance. Sources reveal gold-digging waitress behind company crisis. The article had photos of Lena at work, quotes from anonymous sources about how she'd orchestrated finding Victor's suitcase, and suggestions that she was bleeding him dry with medical bills and expensive demands. Victor's hands shook with rage. He knew exactly who was behind this. In the boardroom, James sat at the head of the table, Victor's usual seat. "Glad you could join us, little brother," James smiled. "We were just discussing the company's future leadership." "This is ridiculous," Victor said. "I used my personal funds for everything. Check the records." "We're more concerned about your judgment lately," one board member said. "These public scandals, missing meetings, the company's stock dropping, all orchestrated by my brother," Victor snapped. "Paranoid accusations now?" James shook his head sadly. "Maybe you need some time off, Victor, to deal with your Personal issues? You mean Lena? Victor looked around the table. Yes, I'm dating someone who works for a living, someone honest and hard-working, unlike some people in this room. The board has made its decision, James said smoothly. We're suspending you pending a full investigation. I'll be acting CEO. Victor laughed bitterly. You really think I'll just step aside? I think you don't have a choice. James slid a paper across the table. Unless you want the next article to be about how you've been making questionable cash deals. That suitcase you lost. Very interesting story there. Victor felt trapped. If the story about the cash got out, it could trigger investigations into some of his more complicated business deals, deals that, while technically legal, wouldn't look good under scrutiny. His phone buzzed, a text from Lena. We need to talk, right now. Go on, James smirked. Run to your waitress. We'll handle things here. Victor walked out without another word. He'd built this company into what it was today. He'd fought off hostile takeovers and weathered financial crises. But this was different. This was personal. When he reached Lena's apartment, she was waiting outside with tears in her eyes. I can't do this anymore, she said before he could speak. I can't be the reason you lose everything. You're not… Look at this. She held up the newspaper. They're making me look like a con artist. Your family hates me. Your business is suffering. None of that matters. It matters to me. Lena's voice broke. I never wanted this kind of life, Victor. The scandals, the gossip, people taking pictures of me at work. I just wanted to help my sister and live a simple life. Victor reached for her, but she stepped back. I think we need to end this, she whispered, before anyone else gets hurt. As Victor watched her walk away, he realized he had a choice to make. He could fight for his company or fight for Lena. For the first time in his life, the choice wasn't about money or power, but first, he had to deal with his brother. And James was about to learn that Victor hadn't become one of the most powerful men in the city by playing nice. Victor sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by darkness, empty whiskey glass in hand. He stared at old family photos. One showed him and James as kids, both smiling before money and power had turned them into enemies. Another showed his father on his deathbed, pointing at Victor and saying, "Take care of the company." Had he failed? His phone had been ringing all day, reporters wanting comments about the scandal, board members expressing their concerns, his mother leaving angry voicemails about the shame he'd brought to the family. Name. He ignored them all. He could only think about Lena. A knock at the door startled him. It was Janet, his assistant, looking nervous. "Mr. Langston, I need to tell you something." She wrung her hands. I helped your brother access your private files. He paid me to do it. I'm so sorry." Victor wasn't even angry. He'd expected as much. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because what he's doing is wrong." Janet pulled out a USB drive. "I made copies of everything, including emails between Mr. James and Miranda Peterson planning this whole thing. They've been working on this for weeks." Victor took the drive, hope flickering for the first time. "Why help me?" "Because in 10 years you've never missed my birthday. You paid for my mother's cancer treatments. You're a good man, Mr. Langston." Janet smiled sadly. "And the way you look at Lena, I've never seen you look at anyone like that." After Janet left, Victor called his most trusted lawyer, Michael Chen. "How quickly can you review some emails?" "Give me an hour," Michael said. "And Victor, whatever this is about, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons." While waiting, Victor drove to Mario's restaurant. He needed to talk to someone who understood Lena. The old Italian man was closing up, but he let Victor in. "Ah, the fancy man. Not so fancy anymore, eh? Mario, I need your help." Victor sat at the counter. "Lena won't talk to me. She thinks she's ruining my life." Mario wiped a glass slowly. "Maybe she's right to stay away. Your world is not kind to people like us." "I don't care about my world anymore, no?" Mario raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you still fighting for your company?" "Because my brother can't win like this, using lies and tricks." "Ah," Mario interrupted. "So, it's about pride." "No, it's…" Victor paused. "I don't know what it's about anymore. Let me tell you about Lena." Mario set down the glass. When her parents died, she was just 19. She could have put her sister in foster care, taken the easy way. Instead, she worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, never complained. I know she's amazing. Oh, no, you don't know. Mario's voice was sharp. You see a beautiful woman who is kind and honest. But Lena, she sees herself as nothing special. Just a girl trying to take care of her sister. Your fancy world? It terrifies her, not because she's not good enough, but because it could hurt the people she loves. Victor's phone buzzed, Michael calling back. These emails are dynamite, the lawyer said. James and Miranda planned everything. They even paid that reporter to write the stories. We can destroy them with this. Send me everything, Victor said. Then he looked at Mario. I need to borrow your kitchen. The next morning, James strutted into his new CEO office, ready to celebrate his victory. Instead, he found Victor sitting in his chair. Good morning, brother, Victor smiled. Busy few weeks, planning hits on me in the press, bribing my assistant, spreading lies about Lena. James's face went pale. You can't prove anything. Victor opened his laptop, showing emails between James and Miranda. Actually, I can prove everything. The board won't care. James tried to sound confident. They've already decided. The board called an emergency meeting this morning. I showed them everything, including your little plan to sell off our father's original properties once you took control. Victor stood up. They voted. You're out. James lunged forward. You think you've won? I'll fight this. No, you won't. Victor's voice was cold. Because if you do, these emails go public, and then the DA might get interested in some of your other dealings. Remember that land deal in Brooklyn? James slumped in defeat. What do you want? Take the job in our London office. Stay there. Never contact me or Lena again. All this for a waitress? James sneered. No, this is for family loyalty, something you never understood. After James slunk away, Victor had one more stop to make. He drove to Lena's apartment building carrying a large paper bag. Jenny answered his knock. She's not here. She picked up extra shifts at Mario's. I know, Victor smiled. Can I use your kitchen? An hour later, Lena trudged up the stairs, exhausted from a double shift. She opened her apartment door and stopped short. Her small dining table was set with checkered tablecloths, just like Mario's. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. And there was Victor, wearing an apron, setting down a plate of slightly messy but homemade spaghetti and meatballs. Mario taught me, he said before she could speak. It took 3 tries to get the sauce right. Burns on my hands to prove it. Victor, I quit the company. What? Lena's eyes widened. But your family. I took care of James. The company's safe. But I'm stepping down as CEO. Victor stepped closer. I'm keeping my shares, my seat on the board, but someone else can run things. Why would you do that? Because Mario was right. I was fighting for pride, not happiness. He took her hands. I don't want to be the man who has everything but nothing that matters. I want to be the man who deserves you. Lena's eyes filled with tears. The press, the scandal, let them talk. I don't care anymore. He pulled her close. I love you, Lena Taylor. Your world, your values, your heart. That's where I want to be. Jenny appeared from her room, grinning. He really did make the sauce himself. Almost burned down the kitchen, twice. Lena looked at the messy kitchen, the imperfect meal, the burn marks on Victor's expensive hands. For the first time, she saw him, really saw him. Not the wealthy businessman, but the man who was willing to change his whole life just to make her pasta. I love you too, she whispered, and pulled him down for a kiss. Behind them, Jenny pretended to gag. Still worse than a soap opera, but at least we get free dinner out of it. 2 months after Victor stepped down as CEO, life had settled into a new rhythm. He'd rented a smaller apartment near Lena's neighborhood, though he kept the penthouse for business meetings. His mother hadn't spoken to him since the scandal, and James was safely tucked away in London. But on this sunny morning, as Victor and Lena walked hand in hand through the farmer's market, something he'd never done before meeting her, trouble was brewing. Victor, a shrill voice cut through the peaceful scene. Elizabeth Langston stood there in her designer clothes, looking completely out of place among the vegetable stands. So it's true. You're actually living like a common person. Mother, Victor said calmly. What are you doing here? Looking for you. You won't answer my calls. You've moved out of your penthouse. She glared at Lena. All because of her. I'm happy, Mother. For the first time in my life. Elizabeth grabbed his arm, pulling him aside. The company's stock is down 15% since you stepped back. The board is worried. Your father would be ashamed. The stock will recover, and Father's been dead for 5 years. You don't know what he'd think. I know he didn't build an empire for you to throw it away for some waitress. Lena, who'd been quietly picking out tomatoes, stiffened at these words. Victor saw tears in her eyes. I should go, Lena whispered. Let you talk to your mother. No. Victor's voice was firm. Mother, either speak to Lena with respect or leave. Those are your choices. Elizabeth's face hardened. You've changed, Victor, and not for the better. You're right, I have changed. He walked back to Lena, taking her hand. I'm not cold and lonely anymore. I have real love in my life. Love? Elizabeth laughed bitterly. Let's see how long love lasts when you're no longer one of the most powerful men in the city. After, she stormed off. Lena squeezed Victor's hand. She's right about one thing, the company is suffering because of me. The company is fine. The stock is down because investors are nervous about change. It'll pass. He picked up a tomato. Now, are you going to teach me how to tell if this is ripe? Because they all look the same to me. Later that day, they visited Jenny in her small campus apartment. She was back at nursing school, fully recovered from her surgery. Big news, Jenny announced. I got accepted for a summer internship at Mount Sinai Hospital. That's amazing. Lena hugged her sister tight. It's a really competitive program, Jenny continued. Only 10 students got in, but it's unpaid. I'd have to quit my part-time job. Victor saw Lena's face fall. He knew she was already stretched thin, helping with Jenny's tuition. I can help, he said carefully, knowing how Lena felt about his money. No, Lena said automatically. Hear me out. Victor sat down. Not a gift, an investment. Jenny's going to be a great nurse. When she's working at a top hospital, she can pay. Hire it back. It's too much. Actually, Jenny interrupted, I have an idea. Victor, you said you want to do more charitable work, right? Why not start a scholarship foundation for nursing students who need help with expenses during unpaid internships? Victor's eyes lit up. Jenny, that's brilliant. We could help dozens of students. And I could be the first. Recipient, Jenny grinned. That way it's not personal, it's business. Lena looked between them, torn. I don't know. Sleep on it, Victor suggested. No pressure. That night, back at Lena's apartment, Victor was washing dishes. A new skill he'd learned. When there was a knock at the door, it was Janet, his former assistant, looking worried. Mr. Langston, something's happening at the company, something bad. She showed them her tablet. The business news was reporting that Langston Enterprises was about to be hit with a major lawsuit. Former employees were claiming financial misconduct, and James's name was all over it. He's getting revenge, Victor realized. He's exposing deals we made years ago, deals that were legal but complicated. Will this hurt the company? Lena asked. It could destroy it. Victor ran his hands through his hair. Everything my father built. Then you have to go back, Lena said softly. What? You have to take control again, save the company, save all those jobs. Lena touched his face. You can't let your brother destroy everything just because of me. I won't lose you. You're not losing me. She smiled sadly. But you can't run from who you are. Victor, you're a businessman, a leader. It's part of why I love you. Come with me, he said suddenly. Move in with me, not at the penthouse. We'll find a new place, something that's ours. Victor, I won't go back to my old life. I'll run the company differently, more ethically. The Scholarship Foundation, Jenny suggested, that's just the beginning. He took her hands. But I need you with me. You make me want to be better. Lena looked around her small apartment, where she'd built a life of simple dignity. I'm scared, she admitted. Your world, It's so different. Our world, he corrected. We'll build it together. Something new. Before she could answer, Victor's phone rang. It was Michael, his lawyer. Victor, the board is meeting tomorrow morning. They want you back as CEO, but you need to act fast. James is flying in from London. I'll be there, Victor said. He looked at Lena. But first, I need an answer. Will you take this leap with me? Lena looked into his eyes that had once been cold with power but now shone with love and hope. She thought about all the changes he'd made for her, all the ways he'd proven his love. Maybe it was time for her to be brave too. Yes, she whispered. Let's build something new, together. Victor pulled her close, his heart full. Tomorrow he would fight for his company. But tonight, he had everything he really needed right here in his arms. What he didn't know was that James wasn't just flying in for a fight over the company. He was bringing information that would shake both Victor and Lena's worlds to their core. The morning of the board meeting, Victor arrived early at Langston Enterprises. The familiar faces of employees lit up when they saw him. Many hadn't seen him since he'd stepped down. "Welcome back, Mr. Langston," the security guard smiled. "Good to see you, Tom. How's your daughter doing in college?" Tom beamed. The old Victor would never have remembered such details, but Lena had taught him that real power came from caring about people, not just profits. In the elevator, Victor straightened his tie. Lena had helped him pick it out, blue like the one he'd worn the day they met. "For luck," she'd said. The boardroom was packed. His mother sat in the corner, pretending not to see him. Miranda Peterson was there too, looking nervous. But no sign of James yet. "Let's begin," Victor said, taking his old seat. "I understand there are concerns about—" The door burst open. James strode in, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit. "Sorry we're late." James smiled coldly. "Traffic from the airport. Everyone, meet David Harrison, our father's former lawyer." Victor frowned. "What's this about, James?" "Show them." James nodded to David, who opened his briefcase. "Before your father died," David began, "he made a change to his will, a change that was never executed because of a mistake in my office." Victor's stomach tightened. "What change?" "He left controlling interest in the company to both sons. Jointly. You and James were meant to run Langston Enterprises. Together." The room erupted in whispers. Victor stood up. "That's impossible. I have the will right here." He pulled out a folder. "That's not the final version," David said quietly. "I found the real one in our archives last month. James asked me to do a thorough search." "How convenient," Victor snapped. "You find this right when James wants revenge?" "It's not about revenge," James said, his voice surprisingly calm. "It's about truth, and speaking of truth," he pulled out another folder. "I did some digging into your girlfriend's past while I was in London." Victor's blood ran cold. "Leave Lena out of this." "Oh, but she's very interesting." James opened the folder. "Tell me, does she know about the Brighton Heights project?" "What does that have to do with anything?" "Brighton Heights." James turned to the board. "Our biggest development project. 5 years ago, we bought up a whole neighborhood of old buildings, tore them down, built luxury condos." "Ancient history," Victor said, but his voice shook slightly. "Not to the Taylor family." James smiled wickedly. "Remember that stubborn old couple who wouldn't sell their little grocery store? The ones who died in that convenient electrical fire?" "That was ruled an accident," Victor protested. "Yes, after our lawyers buried the investigation." James looked around the room. "That couple?" They were Lena's parents. The room went completely silent. Victor felt like he couldn't breathe. "No," he whispered. "Oh, yes." James tossed a newspaper clipping on the table. It showed a younger Lena and Jenny at a funeral. "Their store was the last property we needed. They refused to sell. Then suddenly, tragedy strikes, and their daughters were left with nothing. The insurance company, owned by us of course, denied their claim." Victor remembered that time, but he'd never made the connection. He'd been different then, focused only on profits. He hadn't even learned the names of the people they'd displaced. "Did you know?" James asked softly. "When she returned your suitcase, did you know who she was?" "Of course he didn't," a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Lena stood there, tears in her eyes. But I did, she said. I knew exactly who Victor Langston was when I found that suitcase. Victor stared at her in horror. Lena. I recognized your name right away, she continued, walking into the room. I used to stare at it on all those eviction notices. I thought returning the suitcase would be my revenge, showing you that poor people could be honest even when rich people weren't. Then why? Victor could barely speak. Why did you let me fall in love with you? Because you weren't the man I expected. Lena wiped her eyes. You were different, kind, real. I told myself the past didn't matter. How touching, James sneered. But the fact remains, Victor's company killed your parents. How can you possibly stay with him now that everyone knows the truth? Lena looked at Victor, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Is it true? She asked quietly. About the investigation being buried. Victor nodded slowly. I didn't know they were your parents, but yes, we made problems go away back then. We didn't care who got hurt. I should hate you, Lena whispered. You should, Victor agreed, his voice breaking. But I don't. She took his hand. The man who did those things? He's not who you are anymore. James laughed in disbelief. Are you really this naive? He's a killer. No, Lena turned to face James. He was a businessman who didn't care about consequences, but he's changed. The Victor I know pays for strangers' medical bills, remembers security guards' children's names, and learns to cook just to make me happy. How very sweet, Elizabeth Langston stood up. But this doesn't change the fact that the company legally belongs to both my sons now. Actually, David the lawyer spoke up, there's more. The final will had another condition. If the brothers couldn't work together peacefully, control would go to the son who demonstrated better moral character. That's ridiculous, James scoffed. Your father knew you both well, David said simply. He knew this might happen. The choice of who leads now goes to the board. The board members looked at each other. They'd all seen the changes in Victor. Over the past months, they'd seen how love had transformed him from a cold businessman into a leader who cared about more than just profits. One by one, they turned to face James. I think, the head of the board said, we've seen enough to make our decision. But before he could continue, Jenny burst into the room out of breath. Lena, Victor, you need to see this. Now. She held up her phone, showing a news alert that would change everything once again. Everyone crowded around Jenny's phone. The headline made Victor's heart stop. Breaking new evidence in Brighton Heights fire. Former Langston executive confesses. It's George Wells, Jenny said breathlessly. Your father's old partner. He's dying of cancer and he confessed everything. Victor grabbed the phone, reading quickly. George Wells, dying in a hospital in Florida, had given a full statement to the police. The fire that killed Lena's parents hadn't been ordered by Victor or even James. It had been arranged by their father and George without telling either son. Father did this, James whispered, his face pale. According to Wells, Jenny continued, your father didn't even want the property for the development. He wanted it because Mr. Taylor had evidence of old illegal dealings from the company's early days, evidence that could have ruined everything. Lena sank into a chair, shaking. My father used to say he had proof of something. That's why he wouldn't sell. He said the truth needed to come out. Victor knelt beside her. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. None of us knew, James said quietly. For the first time in years, he sounded like Victor's brother instead of his enemy. Father kept this from everyone. Elizabeth Langston stood up suddenly. This is lies. George Wells was always jealous of my husband's success. He's trying to ruin Richard's legacy from beyond the grave. No, Mother, Victor said firmly. Father ruined his own legacy by choosing power over people's lives. The board members whispered among themselves. Finally, the chairman spoke. In light of these revelations, I believe we need to do the right thing. Mr. Langston, Victor, the board supports you taking full control of the company. But we have conditions. Name them, Victor said. First, a full investigation into all past developments. If we displaced people unfairly, they need to be compensated. Agreed. Second, the nursing scholarship foundation you proposed. Make it bigger. A real charitable foundation in the company's name. Victor looked at Lena, who nodded encouragingly. And finally, The chairman smiled slightly. "We want Ms. Taylor on the foundation's board. Someone needs to keep us honest." James stood up. "You can't be serious." "After everything that's happened, that's exactly why," the chairman interrupted. "We need to change how this company does business. Your brother has shown he can change. Can you?" James looked around the room at the faces of people waiting for his response. Finally, his shoulders slumped. "Keep London," he said to Victor. I need time to think about who I want to be." After James left, others began filing out too. Soon only Victor, Lena, Jenny, and Elizabeth remained. "Mother?" Victor said softly. "What father did—" "Don't." Elizabeth's voice shook. "Don't tell me my husband was a monster. I won't believe it." "He wasn't a monster." Lena surprised everyone by speaking. "He was a man who made terrible choices because he thought he was protecting his family. Just like I made choices protecting Jenny, just like Victor's changing now to protect what matters." Elizabeth looked at Lena for a long moment. Then, without a word, she walked out. "Give her time," Jenny said. "This is a lot for everyone to process." Victor turned to Lena. "I understand if this changes things between us." "Finding out about Father's involvement changes nothing," Lena interrupted. "The past is still painful, but now we know the truth. And the truth is, you're not your father. You're the man who's trying to make things right." "The foundation," Victor said suddenly. "We'll name it after your parents. The Taylor Foundation for Community Support. Not just nursing scholarships. We'll help any family displaced by development. Make sure nothing like this happens again." Lena's eyes filled with tears. They would have liked that. "There's something else." Victor took her hand. "All this talk about truth and changing for the better. It's made me realize something. Life's too short for waiting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Jenny gasped. "Oh my God." "I've been carrying this for weeks," Victor said, his voice shaking slightly. "I was waiting for the perfect moment, but I've learned that real love isn't about perfect moments. It's about choosing each other every day through all the messy, painful, beautiful parts of life." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Lena Taylor," he got down on one knee. "You made me want to be a better man. You taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in how many lives you touch, how much love you give. Will you marry me?" Lena looked at the ring, then at Victor's hopeful face. In his eyes, she saw their whole story, from that first meeting with the suitcase to this moment of truth and redemption. Before she could answer, Elizabeth Langston reappeared in the doorway. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if she would try to stop this moment. Elizabeth took a deep breath, looked at her son kneeling before the woman he loved, and made a choice that would change all their lives forever. Elizabeth Langston stood in the doorway, her hand clutching her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she'd had since Victor was a child. Everyone waited for her to speak, to object, to try to stop this moment. Instead, she walked slowly to where Victor knelt before Lena. "Richard gave me this necklace," Elizabeth said softly, touching the pearls. "On our wedding day." He said it. Represented old money, old values, everything the Langston name stood for. She paused, then reached behind her neck and unclasped it. "But some values need to change." She held the necklace out to Lena. "This should have a new story now, a better one." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Langston." "Elizabeth," she corrected. "And Lena. The answer is yes." Victor looked confused. "Mother?" "The answer to your question is yes," Elizabeth smiled at Lena. "At least it should be, because my son has never been happier than when he's with you. And isn't that what every mother really wants for her child?" Lena looked at Victor, still on his knee, still holding the ring. "She's right," she whispered. Yes, I'll marry." "You?" The room erupted in cheers as Victor slipped the ring on Lena's finger. Jenny was crying and taking pictures with her phone. Even Elizabeth wiped away a tear. "We'll need to plan a wedding," Elizabeth said, already sounding more like herself. "Something elegant, but not too—" "Actually," Lena interrupted gently, "we already know where we want to get married." 3 months later, Mario's restaurant was transformed. The checkered tablecloths were still there, but now they were mixed with elegant flowers. Strings of white lights hung from the ceiling, and the smell of garlic bread mixed with the scent of roses. Victor stood at the front of the restaurant in a simple black suit, watching as Lena walked down the aisle made between the tables. She wore a simple white dress, carrying a bouquet of daisies, her mother's favorite flowers. Jenny walked beside her as maid of honor, beaming with joy. In the front row, Elizabeth sat with perfect posture, wearing a simple blue dress instead of her usual designer outfits. She'd spent the last 3 months helping with the Taylor Foundation, surprising everyone with her dedication to making things right. Mario walked Lena down the aisle, tears streaming down his face. "Your parents would be so proud," he whispered to her. James had come from London for the wedding. He and Victor weren't best friends again, but they were talking. Healing. James had started his own charitable foundation in London, helping small business owners protect their properties from aggressive developers. As Lena reached Victor, she saw happy tears in his eyes. This man who had once cared only about power and money was now someone who cried at weddings. His own wedding, in a family restaurant, surrounded by a mix of wealthy socialites and working-class friends. "Friends, family," the priest began. "We're here today not just to join 2 people in marriage, but to celebrate the power of love to change us, to heal us, to make us better than we ever thought we could be." Victor squeezed Lena's hand as they said their vows. Simple, honest words about love and trust and building a new life together. After they were pronounced husband and wife, Mario brought out a huge wedding cake, made from his grandmother's recipe. The celebration lasted late into the night, with dancing and laughter, and enough food to feed half the neighborhood. Near midnight, Victor and Lena slipped away to the kitchen, the place where he'd learned to cook for her. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close. "More than I ever thought possible." She touched his face. "You know what's funny? When I found that suitcase, I thought it was fate giving me a chance for revenge. Instead, it gave you me." Victor smiled. "Poor trade. Best trade I ever made." She kissed him softly. "Though you still can't make sauce as good as Mario's. I'll keep practicing. We have a lifetime for me to get it right." They walked back to their guests hand in hand. The restaurant windows showed their reflection, not a wealthy man and a waitress anymore, but simply a man and woman in love, ready to write their own story. Jenny was dancing with a young doctor she'd met during her internship. Elizabeth was deep in conversation with Mario about Italian cooking. And at a corner table, James sat with Miranda Peterson, both of them looking more relaxed than they had in years. "Look," Lena pointed to the wall where her parents' picture hung. Mario had put it up years ago, after the fire. Now it was surrounded by photos of the community they'd helped build. Students who'd received Taylor Foundation scholarships, families who'd been helped by the company's new ethical development policies. "They'd be proud of you," Victor said, "of how you took pain and turned it into purpose." "They'd be proud of us," Lena corrected, "all of us, for proving that people can change, that love is stronger than money, that it's never too late to choose a different path." Victor looked around the restaurant, at his mother laughing with Mario, at his brother finding his own way to redemption, at Jenny building her dream of helping others, at all the lives touched and changed by one simple act of honesty with a lost suitcase. "I love you, Lena Langston," he whispered. "I love you too." She smiled. "Now, about that sauce recipe." As they laughed and danced and celebrated, the story of Victor and Lena became part of the neighborhood's legend. The tale of how love could change a man's heart, heal old wounds and bridge 2 different worlds. And in Mario's restaurant, where it all began, their picture joined the wall, the businessman and the waitress who proved that true love was the greatest fortune of all. The end.